What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some early access impressions for Menace, upcoming sort of roguelite TRPG from Overhyped Studios, being published by Hooded Horse this time around. They are the people that made Battle Brothers. Menace, on the other hand, while still a tactical RPG, is a bit of a mix-up for them because it's sci-fi straight away, but also those roguelike elements that I mentioned. Now, this isn't the first time I've taken a look at Menace. The initial time was when they first released the demo that they put out. However, what I'm bringing you guys here is, of course, the early access version, which launches in just a few days, which is possible, of course, because they reached out and offered me that access so I could take a look at it. So before we go full tilt into things like mechanics and whatnot, let's first talk about what this early access should look like, at least right now, and then obviously any curveballs that may happen in the future aren't going to be accounted for. Here in a couple of days, in February 5th, this game launches into early access. They plan on keeping it there for about a year or so they can gather up feedback and then hopefully implement it, of course, while also working on their planned editions. Right now, what they are planning on adding are more biomes, more missions, and just in general events and interactions that will, of course, culminate in the totality of the actual story they are telling here, which we'll get to in just a moment. So that's the stuff that they have planned, with what is currently available in early access being pretty much all of the core systems and taking on as many missions as you want, Iron Man style or no, while also, of course, enjoying all of the things it has to offer combat-wise. So my understanding is the bulk of the main story will come later. That said, still plenty of things to talk about, and let's get into the rest of it. So kicking it off with the actual premise here, what are we doing? Well, we are commanding an elite military unit, initially consisting of a bunch of Republic Marines. You have been sent here with your ship, the Impetus, to basically pacify a wayward frontier colony known as the Wayback. Things don't go well, though, because you are soon cut off entirely from all sorts of communication outside of this system, and while communications may be cut off, your job hasn't stopped, and so you are still going to continue exactly that, trying to get this system in order, and that basically comes down to helping the factions that are already present here with their various problems, which include things like alien life forms, pirates, and an amorphous menace, which is supposed to make up the title, is my understanding. So it does look like the menace of the title will in fact be a specific faction of enemies that you'll have to fight at some point, though I didn't quite get to that point here. Now, while that's all well and good, in order to actually do that stuff, we're going to have to engage with the game's system. So straight away, I want to mention that there is a tutorial available for you at the main menu. It is very basic, but it will teach you the sort of bare minimum stuff you need in order to complete a mission. It also looks like if you start on normal, the first several operations are relatively tame and shouldn't be too difficult for you, so there is a bit of wiggle room there in order to get, your feet under you as you start. Now, once you're done with that, when you actually go to start a new game, you can pick from one of three difficulties: normal, challenging, and expert. You can also choose whether or not to use a randomly generated seed or a preset one if you know the seed number, and whether or not you want to set Iron Man or permadeath. Following on from that, you're going to choose 4 from a total of 8 available Marine squad leaders. Squad leaders are really important because they are effectively the troops that you are sending out, and while they are going to command a squad that will have names and stuff, but will mostly just add stats onto whatever the squad leader is. So the squad leader is really the main driving force of the units that you are actually putting out there, even though there will be more than the squad leader there. So they have all sorts of stats, and you'll want to pick accordingly. I would say probably the first thing to be aware of is that some of these guys are actually what they call pilots, be that vehicles, mechs, things like that, and so understand that if you pick those guys, you're going to have to put them in a vehicle in order to use them. In addition to that, a couple other things to know. So they also have individual abilities that are unique to them that are in addition to the perks or talents or whatever you want to call them that they'll pick up as you promote them. So definitely, mouse over all that stuff before you make your decision. On top of that, while I didn't see too much of this right now outside of a little bit here and there, all of these squad leaders will eventually have a bunch of personal characteristics and relationships with each other that can sort of change how battles play out to a degree. To give an example of that, one of these characters, if they get a certain number of kills in a mission, they can get a bonus for a little while to sort of give you a boost, whereas if a character takes a bunch of losses, depending on their, perks or personality or whatever, they might take that really hard and perform worse over several missions. And those interactions are some of the systems that they plan on fleshing out in the future, but do be aware there are a lot more than 8 available. There are a ton of commanders, and what's more, while you're going to start out with these Marines, as you start messing around with things like the black market, you'll be able to pull in extra hires, more or less. And that's going to bring you pretty much straight into the game world, the system map from your bridge on the Impetus, and there's a few things I want to go over here. So the system map is where you're going to pick your initial operations. Operations are different from missions, and we'll get to that in a second. The second tab is the OCI, or basically the things that you can build on your ship. Your ship is going to start off in pretty rough shape, presumably by whatever event that caused us to be stranded here. However, we are going to be able to fix it. Because of this system's nature as a sort of frontier bit of space, this is the fastest ship here, by a lot, apparently, which does make getting around and having to deal with enemies in space seemingly a non-issue outside of whatever caused this damage to begin with. But as you can see, each of these individual areas marks a portion of your ship, and as we start completing operations, you will earn components that will allow you to add on to these parts. Now, what you can build here is initially kind of limited, but it can do things that offer you just passive bonuses, like getting extra manpower as you complete missions, that sort of thing. However, there is a way to increase what you can build with those components, and that's to start earning the trust of the factions. And you're going to do that by basically doing missions in their part of the system, but the gist of it is basically do certain operations, you'll earn reputation, and as trust goes up with those factions, you'll get to pick some armaments or things like that you can add on to your ship and repair it and get it up and running at full capacity, let's say. Now from there, you've got your squad loadout. This is one of the places you can go to essentially gear up your squad, which includes promoting them when you have the available promotion points. As you complete operations and missions, you'll earn promotion points, which allows you to, of course, promote these individual squad leaders, which then allows them to pick more talents and perks as they go. Up to a maximum of 8, it would seem, at least right now. This is also where you'll gear them out. Now, it's important to understand how that works in terms of the missions, but as you can sort of see here on the screen, every single thing you attach to a character has a supply cost to it. However, it's not really a cost that you're paying, just sort of a total that you are running up. Because when you go to start missions, each mission that you go to actually engage in will have a supply limit, and you can essentially only outfit your characters up to that limit, which means you can't necessarily field a super well-equipped squads every single time based on the supply limit of that mission. So something to understand when it comes to gear, as well as the black market. So the black market is one of the ways you can acquire new equipment. Defeating enemies in missions will cause them to drop items that you can trade here. Looks to be mostly a barter system with a generic number for a currency. But this is where you'll go to mostly outfit your new characters with, better and different types of armor, different weapons, upgrade your vehicles, buy new vehicles for pilots, provided you have the pilots to actually use them, of course. Pick up accessories to help your squads out, the usual stuff more or less. However, this is also where you can go to replace lost squaddies, as well as hire new characters. These are these ones at the very top here. Squaddies are the squads you are going to assign to your squad leaders, and while they do have names and stuff, primarily what they do is up to a maximum of 8 per squad leader, add stats to that squad to make them more effective, but keep in mind that also increases the supply cost as it goes up. Your squaddies are an actual number that you have to keep track of, so something worth noting. And then the other 2 are simply the ability to hire a pilot if you so choose at the cost of authority. One of the resources we'll have available to us, which is what the hiring menu is. But from there, let's get into the missions themselves. So from the system map, you are first going to choose an operation. An operation is a series of back-to-back tactical missions that altogether comprise the operation. So your goal here is to not just complete one battle, but rather complete a series of battles in a roguelike sort of fashion that will see you acquiring buffs and things across that individual operation that can help you or hinder your enemies, things like that. Now, once you're inside of an operation, you can see your initial start points, ways you could go about it, ways you could navigate this operation, things like that. Each individual mission description is going to give you a rough idea of the difficulty of that mission. It's also going to show you the supply limit for it, as well as all of the optional objectives. Optional objectives will decide how well you did on the operation as a whole. Essentially, the more of these you complete, the better it considers you to have done from a 1 to 5 star rating, which will, I believe, get you more rewards at the end of it. But basically, pick your path through the missions here, and that's the general idea, which then brings you to the prep stage. Now, there is going to be intelligence and things you can learn from, as an example, sensors on the impetus that will pick up and kind of be able to display more information in this little map that we've got here. It can show you things like structures, your starting areas, and potentially, if you have enough intelligence, things like actual individual enemy locations, which can help you navigate that mission a bit. And then finally, the missions themselves. So, on one hand, this is a pretty standard TRPG in a lot of ways in terms of how this stuff actually works, but it is presented in a way that looks and feels a little bit different and can take a bit of getting used to. So each of your individual squads assigned to your individual squad leaders are essentially your units here. Now, if you are fielding a pilot, that squad is, of course, whatever it is you have them piloting. In this case, I had one piloting this light infantry vehicle that I had slapped a machine gun on top of, which wound up being extremely effective in these early missions, by the way. And from there, we're going to spend our available action points on the actions that are available to those characters. It looks like there's about 100 action points as a base, and then there's some modifiers that can take it up or down from there. Now, this is where your squad leader comes in, because their stats and their abilities and all that stuff. And what this is going to do is decide how far that squad can move, potentially how much health they have, what their base accuracy is, and that's on top of all the equipment you've assigned to them, which already looks to be pretty varied, including things like different types of armor, weapon types with different ranges, sizes, that kind of thing. If you assign your characters a special weapon, you might have to, as an example, hunker down in place in order to use it in some cases. And all of those things are going to come into effect on the battlefield, and I would say that's where this game is going to get, on top of the interactions between these squad leaders later on, a lot of its replayability from. Outside of that stuff, though, pretty straightforward. All of the structures and things you see on an individual area are typically going to provide you cover. You can also use things like vehicles for cover as well. If you're in the forested temperate areas, being on a forest tile also provides some cover. And of course, that's going to keep you safe from incoming fire. Now, based on your weapons, this part will change a little bit, like in terms of where you need to be and everything. However, one really cool thing here is that morale also plays into this a good bit. Firing at enemies will, of course, potentially lower their morale if you're actually hitting them, of course. But this also applies to enemies, and when you put an enemy into fleeing status, that enemy is effectively defeated. They are going to fully flee the battlefield, and that can actually kind of keep you from having to mop up little enemies that are more or less dead already, at least for a lot of these alien types I've been running into. I assume later enemies will be more difficult to deal with that way, but it was extremely useful here. Now, on top of stuff like that, you can also potentially call in strikes from the impetus with, armaments that you may have attached to it via the other things we've already discussed. That can see you doing things like dropping missiles, doing strafing runs, things like that. The vehicles in particular are of great interest to me. For instance, it's possible to run over enemies with them. As an example, there are these walker mechs you can get as well. And I'd be curious to know the exact limits of that system specifically, as it seems really fun thus far. All of that stuff aside, the actual enemies you are fighting do seem to operate differently as well. Aliens, for instance, tend to try to rush you directly. Some of their attacks are melee-oriented in nature, and I've noticed that they don't always have the best of luck with that, as most of them are pretty feeble and easy to kill in that way. Some of the larger ones, however, are more of a threat, as these alien life forms seems to be kind of on the bug side of things. Some of them have these cannon things they can shoot out of their tail at you, which are pretty deadly, especially if they hit your vehicles. They can cause fires. Whereas pirates are mostly human enemies using a lot of the same tactics you do, which includes things like actually trying to make use of cover and whatnot, which can make them a little more deadly just because with aliens they're often not in cover and therefore easy to kill, though most structures and covers, things like that, can be destroyed. And in both cases, you also need to keep an eye out for things like armor and armor penetration, which are all just little things you have to think of. And when you've beaten so many of these missions, you'll eventually beat the operation, which then gives you a choice of rewards, components to upgrade and everything, and then you can go back to the system and choose what you want to do from there and start the process all over again. So in many ways, I would say Menace at the start of its early access period is showing some promise. A lot of the systems and things like that, the core ideas seem to be there and present, and what I would say personally from this is that right now what it needs is simply to expand upon those ideas, which some of that seems to already be in the works, things like new biomes, new missions, new interactions, stuff like that. I think the story is probably what would tie it together for me to give this a little bit more of a focus in terms of what you're actually doing, but so far it feels pretty great. One thing I hope they do in the future is expand upon the tutorial a little bit to help people out. So right now I would say Menace is definitely promising, and it just kind of needs that early access period to really flesh it out and give you more things to do overall. And if you like the tactics genre, I think it's probably going to be worth your time just from this initial bit. Speaking for myself though, I enjoyed what I saw here. I will wait until this game fully releases to even think about actually reviewing it, but so far so good, and that's pretty much all I've got to say for it right now. So hope you enjoyed this look at the game. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.